The bride was left behind alone in a wedding dress, sitting in her wheelchair on the church steps where her forever was supposed to begin. Mira Callahan thought that was the end of her story. She believed she was broken, that no one could ever truly love her again. And Luke Hartwell? A single father just passing through town, carrying old regrets and a heart that had long stopped hoping. He never expected to see Mira again. Not like this, not here, not now. But fate had a quiet way of bringing broken pieces back together. When Luke's 8-year-old son looked at Mira and whispered, "Dad, she looks like someone who needs us," everything changed. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about second chances, quiet bravery, and the small miracles that happen when we choose to stay. And if you stay with this story until the end, you'll see a journey of healing, of hope, and of love that doesn't need to be flawless to be forever. Because sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come right after we think it's all over. Luke Hartwell had one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back to adjust the rearview mirror. In it, he caught a glimpse of something that softened the lines on his tired face. His son Noah, fast asleep in the back seat. The little boy was hugging a well-worn stuffed dog, his mouth slightly open, breathing slow and even. Luke smiled to himself. That kid could fall asleep anywhere, even on this winding road that cut through the golden fields of western Pennsylvania. And maybe, Luke thought, that was a blessing. Because for him, this drive wasn't peaceful at all. It had been nearly 10 years since he last set foot in Maple Creek. Back then, it had meant everything to him. Before the accident, before the goodbye, before he had to learn how to live without the woman he once believed would grow old by his side. Mira Callahan. Her name used to rise in his chest like a quiet prayer. Now it hung in the air like the chorus of a song you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. He never meant to come back. Truly he hadn't. But then Noah's school project, Family Roots, had knocked on the door of Luke's past like a ghost that wouldn't let go. He tried to avoid it. He really did. Until Noah looked up at him and asked, "Dad, did you ever love someone before Mom?" And for the first time in a very long time, Luke couldn't lie. So here they were now, driving through fields that shimmered under the afternoon sun, heading toward a little town that used to hold all his dreams. "Where are we?" Noah mumbled, rubbing his eyes and blinking at the sky. Luke cleared his throat. "Almost there. Thought we'd stop by an old place before heading to the inn." Noah frowned. "Is it boring?" Luke chuckled. "Only if you don't like stories." That got Noah's attention. "True stories?" "The truest kind," Luke said. "The ones that never end the way you expect." They pulled into the gravel driveway of St. Augustine's Church, a small white chapel with weathered doors and a steeple that still reached for heaven, like it was hoping for one more chance. Luke's breath caught. It looked exactly the same, and completely different. He helped Noah out of the truck. "This church," Luke said, nodding toward the doors, was... Noah blinked up at him. "You got married before Mom?" Luke slowly shook his head. "No, the wedding never happened." And then they heard it, a strange, quiet hush, broken only by the soft sound of someone quietly crying, carried gently by the wind. Luke turned, instinct sharpening, and then he saw her. Luke froze. There she was, sitting alone on the stone steps of the chapel, in a white wedding dress that clung to her like a memory she hadn't meant to wear. The veil was tossed to one side. Her hands trembled as she dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. And beside her, the wheelchair glinted quietly in the afternoon sun, like a silent witness to everything she never thought would happen. Even after 10 years, Luke knew exactly who she was. Mira. Time had softened her features, but the sadness in her eyes, that was still hers, still unmistakable. Something in his chest pulled tight. All the questions he'd buried for years came rushing back at once. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly persistent, like rain seeping through an old crack. Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, is that the lady you used to love?" Luke didn't answer. Mira looked up. Their eyes met. No shock, no smile. Just breath, like someone remembering how to be alive again. Luke stepped forward, slowly. "Mira." Her lips trembled. "Luke." He crouched down beside her. Didn't care about the dust, didn't try to hide the tears rising in his eyes. "He left," she said softly. Today was supposed to be the wedding, but he walked away. Luke's chest tightened. He knew that feeling, except this time, it was her on the steps. "I'm sorry," he said, almost a whisper. Mira let out a tired laugh. No edge, just pain. "You're 10 years too late." "I know." Luke lowered his head. "I should have looked for you, but I thought you didn't want to be found." She looked away. I didn't. I didn't want you to see me like this." Luke's voice softened, steadier now. "You were never something I needed to look away from, Mira. You left before I got to prove that." Then came a small voice behind him. "You're pretty." They both turned. Noah was standing a few steps away, hands behind his back, a little unsure but completely sincere. "Even if you're crying." Mira blinked, then just barely smiled. "Thank you." Noah walked up to her side, crouching down. "My dad says people walk in all kinds of ways. I think you walk with your heart." And in that moment, something shifted. Luke saw it in Mira's eyes, a flicker of warmth, the first spark of something not broken. Mira wiped her face again, slower this time. Luke looked at her gently. "Would you mind some company?" She nodded. "More than anything." Luke sat beside her, not too close, not too far, just enough for her to know he was there. For a while, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because, after all these years, just sitting together somehow felt like enough. Mira's eyes lingered on the church doors, the ones she was supposed to walk through. "I didn't think I'd ever see you here," she said, voice calm but tired. Luke let out a slow breath, still facing forward. "Me neither." A beat passed. Mira turned slightly, her gaze distant. "What brought you back, Luke?" "Showing Noah around town," he said. "We were heading to the inn, and I thought maybe I'd stop by the old place." Mira gave a faint smile, something between wistful and sad. "Funny timing, huh?" Luke finally looked at her, and really saw her. She was still Mira, but no longer the girl he once knew. And maybe he wasn't the same either. "Maybe it wasn't just timing," he said quietly. Mira lowered her head, fingers tightening around the crumpled tissue in her hand. "Do you want to know what happened?" she asked, her voice rough but calm. Luke gave a small nod. "Only if you want to tell me." He looked at her. That face is still beautiful but different. Still Mira, but no longer the girl he used to know. There was something deeper in her eyes now. Older, wiser, tired, but still gentle. Still her. "He left," Mira said quietly, eyes fixed on the heavy wooden doors of the church. "Right before the dinner last night." Luke's brow furrowed. "Why?" Mira swallowed. "He said it wasn't because of me, just that life with me would always feel like something was missing." Luke was silent for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "Coward." Mira gave a faint shrug. "Maybe, but at least he didn't lie." Luke turned towards her, his voice low. "Being honest doesn't make it any less cruel." She said nothing, the quiet stretched. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she added, "I guess I've gotten used to being left behind." Luke looked at her, his expression softening. "Mira, don't ever get used to that." That air between them shifted, quieter somehow. Luke turned his gaze toward the wooden church doors. He remembered it clearly, the spring sunlight filtering through stained glass, the faint scent of roses on the breeze. He had stood there, waiting, until the priest approached, eyes uneasy, until Luke realized she wasn't coming. "I still remember," he said softly, "that whole afternoon. I stood there, waiting for you." Mira swallowed. "I saw you." She didn't look at him. Her voice was barely more than breath. "From the upstairs window." Luke turned, stunned. "You were there?" Mira nodded slowly. "In my dress, standing behind the curtain. My legs felt weak. Not from the accident, from fear." "Why didn't you come down?" She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Because I didn't think I could give you the life you deserved." Luke's chest tightened. "That wasn't your decision to make." "I didn't want pity." Luke shook his head, his voice low but sure. "I never pitied you, Mira. I loved you." She bit her lip, her voice unsteady. "But I didn't love myself. How could I believe anyone else could?" Silence fell again. Nothing more to say. Only truth, finally spoken. Just then, Noah came running back, arms full of dandelions. "Miss Mira," he said brightly, "can we go inside? I want to put flowers on the pews." Mira blinked, caught off guard. "You want to decorate the church?" Noah nodded earnestly. "It still feels like a wedding day." Mira smiled, soft and real, reaching her eyes for the first time. "You remind me of a student I used to teach." "You were a teacher?" Noah asked, eyes wide. "I taught dance," she replied. "Ballet, jazz, modern, before the accident." Noah studied her. "Can you still teach?" Mira hesitated, then nodded gently. "Not the way I used to, but maybe a little." Luke watched them quietly. The boy leaned into her like she was already someone familiar. And she didn't flinch. Something stirred in Luke, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. "Mira," he said, his voice calm but steady, "would you have dinner with us tonight?" She looked at him, surprised. "I don't exactly look like someone ready to go out." Luke smiled. "You look like someone who deserves a real meal." Noah chimed in, completely serious. "And dessert first. That's non-negotiable." Mira looked between the two of them, then at Luke's hand, gently extended. No pressure, no rush, just a quiet invitation. "I'm not sure I'd be the best company tonight." Luke's voice was warm. "That's okay. Just be you." She hesitated, then slowly reached out and took his hand, not to rise, just to reconnect with something she thought she'd lost. That evening, the three of them sat around a small table in the dining room of Willow Glen Inn. The lights were soft and golden, just enough to make everything feel warmer, gentler. Mira had changed. A simple dress, an old cardigan. No makeup, no effort to impress. And yet somehow she looked more beautiful than Luke remembered. Not because of what she wore, but because she was there. Noah insisted on dessert first. Chocolate cake arrived before the main course. Mira didn't protest, she just smiled. And for the first time in months, her laughter didn't feel cautious. It was light, real, alive. Luke said little during dinner. He didn't need to. He just watched her talk to Noah, listened to her voice filling the space like it belonged there. And maybe he'd forgotten how much he missed that sound. After dinner, they lingered on the back porch. Noah curled up beside Mira mid-story about the CEO duck and fell asleep with his head in her lap. Luke moved to pick him up, but Mira placed a hand on his. "Let him stay a little longer." Luke nodded, and they sat like that for a while, quiet, under a sky full of stars. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and slow. Mira rolled into the dining room just as Luke was finishing his coffee, his eyes resting on the garden beyond. She looked different, not in appearance but in energy. Her face was still Mira's, but lighter somehow, as if she had finally put something down. Luke stood instinctively. "Morning." "Morning," she replied, scanning the room. "Where's Noah?" Luke smiled. "Out back. He's declared himself captain of the Ducks and is currently holding a team meeting." Mira chuckled, caught off guard. "Sounds very official." Luke tilted his head. "Extremely. The captain specifically requested your attendance." Mira was quiet for a moment, glancing down at her hands resting in her lap. "I almost didn't come this morning." Luke didn't push, instead gently. "What changed your mind?" She looked up. "Your son." Luke smiled again, slower this time, fuller. "Yeah, he has that effect." The silence between them lingered. Not empty, not awkward. Just still. The kind of quiet that comes right before something begins, even if you don't know what it is yet. After breakfast, Luke took Mira out back. Noah was crouched by the pond, tossing bits of bread to a cluster of waddling ducks, his unofficial morning meeting. When he saw Mira, his face lit up. "Miss Mira, they're all here today. Want to help name them?" Mira laughed. "I get to pick the naughty one." Noah nodded solemnly. "That's Gertrude. She pecks everyone." "Then we'll get along just fine," Mira grinned. Luke stood a short distance away, arms crossed casually, watching them. He wasn't sure what amazed him more, how easily Mira laughed or how naturally Noah leaned into her presence like she'd always been part of their world. A little while later, under the shade of the willow tree, Noah turned to her. "Did you really used to be a dance teacher?" Mira nodded. "Since I was young. Ballet was my first love." "Do you still remember how to teach?" She hesitated, then smiled. My body can't dance like it used to, but my heart still remembers. Noah's eyes lit up. Can you teach me with your heart then? Before Luke could speak, Mira answered, soft but sure. Of course, Captain of the Ducks. They began under the willow. Mira lifted her arms in a slow, miraful arc. Noah mimicked her, a bit clumsy but completely focused. Don't force it, she said gently. Just imagine the wind moving through your hands. Their arms moved through the morning air, like paintbrushes, across sky. No choreography, just quiet rhythm. Luke stood nearby, coffee in hand, still as stone. She was teaching again. She was alive again. And even though she hadn't taken a single step, she was dancing. That afternoon, the sunlight turned softer. Noah sat on the porch steps, hunched over his sketchbook, coloring with quiet focus. Mira was nearby, tea in hand, watching him now and then. What are you drawing? She asked gently. You, Noah replied without looking up. From this morning, under the willow tree. Mira let out a soft laugh. I didn't think I was very draw-worthy. Noah shrugged. You are. Kind of soft, but strong. Her smile lingered longer than expected. That kind of stillness, the good kind, settled in her chest. Luke stepped out from inside, handing her a glass of lemonade. She looked up, smiled. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind where words weren't necessary. After a moment, Mira spoke, quiet, almost like she was thinking out loud. It's been a long time since I felt like I belong somewhere. Luke tilted his head. You always did. Maybe you just forgot. Mira gave a small, sad smile. I used to think if I couldn't dance, I wasn't anyone. The lights, the music, the stage. When they disappeared, so did I. Luke set his glass down. You didn't disappear, Mira. You're just learning how to be full again. Bit by bit. She turned to him, searching his face. You really believe that? Luke didn't rush to answer. He simply nodded, steady, certain. Later that evening, just before bed, Noah handed Mira his sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of her, seated in her wheelchair beneath the willow, arms raised, eyes closed. Still, powerful, whole. At the top, in uneven handwriting, he had written, Miss Mira dances with her heart. Mira clutched the sketchbook to her chest, eyes misty. You don't even know how much this means to me. Noah yawned and leaned against her arm. Then let's dance again tomorrow, okay? Mira nodded, voice thick. Yes, tomorrow, and the day after that. Night had fallen. Noah was fast asleep, his sketchbook still tucked under one arm. Outside on the porch, the breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of grass and old wood. Luke and Mira sat side by side, not too close, not too far. Thank you, Mira said softly, her eyes on the garden. For today. Luke turned the glass in his hand slowly. I didn't make today happen. She glanced at him. No, but you stayed, and that isn't always easy. A quiet pause. There were moments, she continued, when I thought I'd lost everything. Not just my legs, but the part of me that used to dance. The part that believed I deserved something beautiful. Luke looked at her, really looked. Then he said, You don't have to go back to who you were, Mira. You just have to come back to yourself. She gave a quiet, almost broken smile. Sometimes I don't know how to love myself anymore. Luke didn't rush his reply. He simply reached over and rested his hand on hers. Not gripping, just a gentle touch. Loving yourself isn't always miraful. Sometimes it's just leaving the door open and letting someone in. Mira looked down at his hand. She didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered. I'm learning, she whispered. Luke nodded. So am I. They sat in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because in that moment, they understood each other completely. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the trees, soft and golden, like a breath. Mira sat on the porch in her wheelchair, holding a warm cup of tea. Luke was just about to wheel her down the garden path, as they had done every morning, but she stopped him. Wait. He turned. Mira's gaze was fixed on the patch of grass ahead. A narrow stone path led toward the willow tree, not far, but not close either. I want to try today, she said quietly, but with certainty. No chair. I need to see how far I can go. Luke stepped toward her, concern flickering in his eyes. You sure? Mira nodded. I don't need to make it all the way. I just need to know I still can. He didn't argue. He simply stepped beside her, his presence steady, offering strength without taking control. Mira reached for the cane, one hand on the armrest, the other tightening around the handle. One step, slow, unsteady, but real. Then another. By the third step, her breath caught. Sweat beaded at her forehead. Her legs shook. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Luke stayed close. His voice was low, steady. You can stop, Mira. But you didn't fail. You stood. You walked. And that already matters. From the porch, Noah had appeared. He stood still, sketchbook pressed tightly to his chest. There was something different in his eyes. Wide, glassy, full of feeling he didn't quite have words for. He watched Mira, standing, trembling, but standing, one hand on her cane, the other clutching Luke's. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Mom. It slipped out, unrehearsed, honest, almost like a breath. Mira turned to him. For a heartbeat, no one moved. She didn't speak, didn't question it. She just smiled, soft and full, and nodded once, as if to say, I heard you, and I'm here. The afternoon sun stretched long across the grass, warm and soft like a blanket. Noah had fallen asleep, head resting on Mira's leg, still clutching his sketchbook loosely in one hand. The page was half finished, a drawing of the three of them under the willow tree, with messy little letters underneath. Families can start again. Mira looked down at it. The corners of her mouth trembled. I never thought, she whispered, that I'd have this. Not again. Luke turned to her, his gaze steady and soft. You don't have to be surprised, he said, and you deserve it. You always did. Mira shook her head slightly. There were times I thought I was just the leftover part of an old dream. No, Luke replied, low and sure. You're not in the old dream anymore. You're rewriting it. Mira looked up, eyes locking with his. Are you sure you still want to be in the new version? Luke didn't answer right away. He simply leaned down and pressed a quiet kiss to the back of her hand. I never left it, he murmured. They sat together in silence, not talking about the past, just existing, fully, presently, and without pretense. And ahead of them, quietly waiting, was tomorrow. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear. The breeze was cool, carrying the scent of sunlight and old chalk dust. Mira stood outside the Maple Creek Community Center, the red brick building with tall windows that once held an entire world inside it for her. Luke stood beside her, hand resting gently at her elbow, not because she needed it, but because he wanted to be close. Noah ran ahead, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. They're waiting for you. Mira drew a slow, steady breath. I'm not sure I remember what it feels like to be in front of a class. Luke smiled. Well, I'm sure you still know how to make people feel something. She stepped inside, slowly, steadily. The room looked just the same, scuffed wooden floors, that faint scent of sweat and dust. Sunlight streaming through the tall windows, like it always had. A few parents and children had already gathered. Some were in wheelchairs, some walked with a limp, some just looked nervous. And they were all looking at her, the woman with a cane, bright eyes, and the sign propped by the door. Begin Again Ballet, a class for every body, every soul. Mira stopped in the center of the room. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty that this mattered. She lifted her head. Her voice was warm and clear. Hi, everyone. My name is Mira Callahan. I used to be a dancer. Then for a long time, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But today I'm here to start again. The room went quiet. Then a little girl in a wheelchair raised her hand. Miss Mira, I've never danced before, but I want to. Can you teach me? Mira smiled. I'll teach you to dance with whatever you have. And trust me, that's enough. Soft applause broke the silence. Tentative at first, then building. At the back of the room, Luke stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes shining. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching. A girl with her arms lifted high, dancing in a wild, open space. And at the center of it all was Mira, not trying to be who she once was, just being herself, and that was more than enough. The sun had begun to dip low. Behind them, the community room grew quiet. The kids had gone home, taking with them the echo of laughter, the soft roll of wheels, and promises like, "See you next week, Miss Mira." Mira sat on the stone steps, her cane resting across her knees. She wasn't tired. She just felt light, like something she'd carried for years had finally been set down. Luke sat beside her, hands on his lap, his eyes resting on the field ahead. He said nothing, just stayed. "A small part of me," Mira began, "thought today might be a failure." Luke turned slightly. "Why?" She gave a quiet laugh. "Because I'm not who I used to be. I can't demonstrate steps. I can't move like I once did." Her hand tightened slightly around the cane. "But when I looked into those kids' eyes, I realized they don't need me to be perfect. They just need me to be present." Luke nodded slowly. "Sometimes showing up is the bravest thing we can do." Mira turned to him. "Do you think I've really started again?" Luke looked at her, really looked. "No," he said gently. "You didn't just start again. You opened a door for others to begin too." Mira sat in stillness. A breeze passed, lifting the hair at her temples, brushing across her cheek. She exhaled, eyes soft on the amber sky. "For the first time in years," she said, "I feel at peace in my own body." Luke didn't say anything. He just reached over and placed his hand over hers, steady, silent, certain. And they sat there, in the first golden dusk of a new chapter. No grand declarations, just being in it, together. That evening after dinner, Noah sat cross-legged on the rug with his sketchbook in his lap. He flipped through page after page, drawings of ducks, of dancing, of Mira smiling beneath a willow tree. Then he looked up, eyes lit with an idea. "Dad," he said, "what if we have a show?" Luke raised an eyebrow. "A show?" "Yeah," Noah nodded. "Outside, with lights, and music, and Miss Mira as the star." Mira, curled up on the couch with a blanket over her legs, laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not exactly a star anymore." Noah tilted his head. "But you shine, that counts." Luke chuckled. Hard to argue with that logic. Mira shook her head, but her smile lingered. "Okay," she said softly, "one small performance, but only if dessert comes after this time." Noah grinned. "Deal." That weekend, under the soft glow of string lights in the backyard, friends and neighbors gathered. Mira sat under the willow tree, wearing a simple dress, cane in hand. She didn't stand to dance, she didn't need to. With music drifting from the speakers and the moon high above, she raised her arms, moved her hands with Mira, and told a story. Not with steps, but with presence, with strength, with soul. Luke watched from the edge of the garden, Noah curled against his side. "Is she dancing?" Noah whispered. Luke nodded. "Yes," he said. "She is." And that night, as the last notes faded into the dark and the world grew quiet, Mira felt something settle deep inside her, something steady and whole. Not because she had returned to who she was, but because she had finally become who she was meant to be. That night, long after the last guest had gone and the stars blinked quietly overhead, Mira sat by the window with her journal open in her lap. The room was still. A soft breeze moved the curtains like breath. She picked up her pen. April 12th, I didn't return to the girl I was. I didn't reclaim the stage or the spotlight, but I found something deeper, a steadier rhythm, a gentler kind of strength. And love, real love, didn't wait for me to be whole. It waited for me to believe I already was. She set the pen down, closed the journal, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing after her life. She was living it, here, now, fully. And that was enough.